This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. So 2019 has been a pretty good year for platinum stocks at the JSE. Today's 1.1% fall in that index notwithstanding. The largest platinum sector union over there has agreed to a 3-year wage deal with Anglo American Platinum, Impala Platinum and Sibanye-Stillwater, basically the big players in that space. The platinum index is up by over 140% so far this year. For comparison, the price of the metal, it's up 12.4% in the spot market over the same time frame. Here's what's coming up tonight. Air transport in South Africa grinds to a halt as the national carriers employees strike gets underway. We'll also be taking a deeper look at the cost of the Kenya and Somali diplomatic row. And Hong Kong sinks into a recession for the first time in a decade. Quite a bit to get through, but let's start off in South Africa tonight. Workers at the state carrier, South African Airways, have started a 2-day strike. SA, in fact, has cancelled almost all of its domestic, regional and international flights following this walkout. Now, the workers affiliated to the unions NUMSA and SACA are demanding an 8% salary increase and an end to the carrier's retrenchment plans. CGTN's Angelo Coppola has been following the story. He filed this update.
The strike started with NUMSA and SACA members meeting outside SAA headquarters at 4 o'clock on Friday morning, vowing to be there until SAA management met their demands, which included a wage increase and the need to insource its $1.8 billion procurement budget.
We are going to be highlighting the crisis at South African Airways. For us, we are between a rock and a hard place, you know. SAA is saying that if we go on strike, it'll collapse the airline. But if we don't go on strike, nothing will change.
SAA announced on Wednesday that it would ground all of its flights on Friday and Saturday and urged its passengers to reach out to the airline to make alternative arrangements. It didn't stop the chaos erupting at OR Tambo International, though.
Because I was scheduled to travel from Gaborone to Maputo today via SAA Airways, but unfortunately my flight has been cancelled or scheduled because of the ongoing strike. It was long hours of traveling. I'm tired. I was supposed to be already in Maputo by now.
While passengers are understandably upset, union leaders want airline management to come to the negotiating table with a reasonable offer.
Well, we hope that management can come back today and offer an 8% so these workers can go back and service the public tomorrow. But management have chosen the route of arrogance.
Airline management have targeted staff as a cost-cutting tool, but unions say their focus is wrong. It's the procurement part of the business that needs attention.
We want them to insource. SAA spends 25 billion per annum on procurement. That is its biggest cost driver, not labor. And it was to retrench 944 workers to save 700 million. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
You've got the customer's needs on one hand and the union's needs and demands on the other, and management in the middle not budging. At the moment, it's costing them $3.5 million and it's set to continue rising. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN at OR Tambo International Airport in South Africa.
All right, then we've covered this story from the perspective of the taxpayer and also from the perspective of clients. But what about the perspective of the workers? Let's find out. Zola Batatu is a customer service agent at South African Airways. He's also shop steward at NUMSA's Cape Town branch. He joins us now live from that very location. Zola, good to see you. Thank you for your time this evening. Has there been any feedback at all from management today since the strike started?
Okay, thank you, sir. There is a feedback actually. The company has actually has invited us to meet tomorrow, but we will meeting with a mediation because they sent the mediation to CCMA to invite us. We've got the email from CCMA to say tomorrow by 9 o'clock we'll be meeting the management at South African Airways offices at Airways Park in Johannesburg.
Right, so according to the airline's acting CFO, the carriers offered a 5.9% wage hike in April, and they say they're willing to backdate that by at least 6 months. But tell us from the union's perspective, why is this not acceptable?
First of all, at South African Airways in 2014, together with the pilots, we took a wage freeze. And what happened in 2015, when you got our increase, has employees that are not the pilot, we've got our increase, but it was not backdated from 2014, but pilots get backdated from 2014. And actually, this year, the pilots have got their 5.9%, which means together with the meal allowance they backdated from last year, which now put us in the predicament whereby if you actually count how much per pilot that will, how much the pilot will get when you count one, we compare on our 5.9 that we'll be getting. On our side, we'll be getting about less than 800 million, and pilots will be getting more than 200 million, which means it is a disgrace. At least the company should see that we are not being reasonable, but we want them to meet us halfway.
Right. So essentially, if I understand you correctly, you're basically arguing that there's a section of the staff, for essentially cabin crew and others, who are being treated unfairly vis-a-vis pilots. You've made sacrifices, but you're not being rewarded for it.
Yes, we did sacrifice in 2014, and we were never rewarded. They only rewarded the pilots. And it's us, the cabin crew, together with the operation staff.
Okay, looking at the numbers though, the company's revenues have been relatively flat from 2013 on to 2017, barely about 30 billion rand in revenue every year, at least from the audited accounts that we can see. If this 8% wage hike is to be delivered and yet revenues are flat, what else in the company's costs have to be cut?
Actually, there's nothing that South African Airways need to cut. Except the board that we have that is always there to interfere with the CEOs that comes and go. You'll remember not so long ago we had a CEO called Mr. Jahana Vuyane. He was working very hard to make sure that he turned around the company. Remember, at South African Airways, we had the LTTS that has been there for quite some time, that there was no CEO that was touching that LTTS. And Mr. Jahana came and he touched the LTTS, and also we reported to him that we have forensic reports that are just piling there, and there is nobody who want to take want to make sure that is following and making sure that the investigation is being done, and make sure that whoever that is corrupt, it did corruption inside the company is being taken into task. But what happens is that the management will always turn a blind eye. But the only CEO that came and rescued us when it comes to that, it was Mr. Jahana, whereby he fired most of the staff, which means now some of them, they've been suspended and they decided to push him out.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Zola Batatu, thank you very much for your input into our bulletin tonight. We'll, of course, be looking forward to talking to you again. Now then, we're still in Africa's most industrialized economy. South Africa's biggest platinum mining union, AMCU, has sealed a 3-year wage deal with the country's largest platinum miners. Now, the agreement between AMCU on one hand and Anglo-American Platinum, Impala Platinum and Sibanye-Stillwater on the other amounts to more than $386 million. That includes a $68 basic pay increase per worker. AMCU has been negotiating with platinum miners since July this year. The deal comes as quite a bit of relief, frankly, to South Africa's mining sector. Authorities in the country had been fearful of a repeat of the 2014 to 2015 platinum sector strike that crippled production and grievously hurt the economy. Austerity is over and the focus is now on boosting productivity and earnings. That at least is a message from Zimbabwe's Finance Minister, Professor Mthuli, as he sought to deliver his 2020 budget outline on Thursday. However, not everyone is as enthusiastic about the production and people-centered budget, as CGTN's Farai Mokutuya now reports.
Finance Minister Mthuli believes Zimbabwe's economy will rebound in 2020. However, some feel his ambitious projections are short on detail.
Currently, we're talking of capacity utilization levels in industries well below 50%, simply because of the electricity challenge. So really, those are the factors that I was expecting to see from the budget to say, how are we going to address this electricity supply gap? How are we going to deal with debts around ESCOM?
Despite calling it a people's budget, Professor Mthuli Ncube's pronouncement did little to address the very real and pressing challenges Zimbabweans face day to day, chief amongst which is trying to access cash. The issuance of $30 million in new currency hasn't satisfied demand.
They promised us that there will be plenty of cash in the bank, but we still haven't seen it. I have been all day and I'm still waiting. I'm about to collapse from hunger.
She will only cheer the budget if it reins in spiraling inflation, she says.
The money I want to withdraw can only buy one or two things because everything is now expensive. I want the government to do something to make things affordable again.
Scrapping of subsidies on maize and wheat could mean higher prices though. Raising of tax-free thresholds should put a little more money in people's pockets, while jobs are to be created through incentives for businesses to employ youths.
It's probably a step in the right direction, especially when then you consider the social effects of having unemployment rate at 95%. There are also socio-economic risks at the same time. Youth are not employed, they're not active, and that's probably a first step to say, let's come up with this venture capital fund.
The budget deficit is projected at 1.5% of GDP on the back of government cost containment. Fare Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Right, then a quick run through some company headlines, starting in South Africa. Telkom South Africa is considering a takeover of Cell C, that's South Africa's third largest mobile phone service provider. Telkom's bid includes a plan to reduce Cell C's debt and to renegotiate contracts with suppliers. This approach comes as Cell C explores options to recapitalize the company. Cell C has been wallowing in debt for years as it tries to keep up with steep competition from much larger players like Vodacom and MTN. Elsewhere, the Kenyan government has announced plans to delist and buy out Air France KLM, local banks and more than 80,000 individual shareholders from the state-owned carrier, Kenya-Airways. The plan is part of the government strategy to nationalize the debt-ridden national carrier. Kenya wants to emulate countries like Ethiopia, which runs its entire air transport assets from airports to fueling operations to the airline itself under one company. In the meantime, the Namibian arm of South Africa's Standard Bank is listed on the Namibian Securities Exchange. The move follows an initial public offering that was nearly 2 times oversubscribed. Standard Bank, which is South Africa's largest bank by assets, raised nearly $49 million through this IPO. The lender says the listing will allow it to make strategic acquisitions as well as increase access to capital. And finally, 55 years after Ford introduced the Mustang, the automaker wants to again leverage that nameplate to, in its words, propel itself into the future. An electric future, that is. Officially named the Mustang Mach-E, Ford's first ever fully electric SUV debuts in Los Angeles this weekend. The SUV is among more than a dozen all-electric cars that the company plans to launch by 2022 as it moves away from traditional gas-powered vehicles. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be looking at the cost of the Kenya-Somalia diplomatic row and where the two countries go from here. And Egyptians are adjusting to new ways of living as austerity measures take shape.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
action on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the program. Leaders of Kenya and Somalia have agreed to restore ties following a meeting between the two heads of state in the Kenyan capital barely 24 hours ago. Now, the two nations have been at loggerheads since earlier this year over oil and gas rights, and that essentially has manifested itself directly through a maritime border row. Here's CGTN's Abdulaziz below with more.
In a joint press conference, Somali and Kenyan leaders announced the resumption of ties between the two neighbors, ending months-long standoff between the two East African nations.
We have a lot of things in common, our people to people, government to government, business to business. Of course, we have a trade, okay, that's really mutually benefit for both countries. And people basically take it our differences rather than our common interest.
Over the last couple of months, you know, we have had certain issues that have strained our relationship. But today we have agreed with my brother that there is need for us to ensure we bring normality to our relationship, we bring sensibility back to our relationship.
A maritime boundary dispute along the Indian Ocean is at the heart of the dispute. In 2014, Somalia sued Kenya at the International Court of Justice. The Hague-based court is due to hear the case in June 2020 after it was postponed 2 times.
And that's why I have to assure that the ICJ issue will not affect our bilateral relationship, and to make sure that we both benefit our government-to-government relationship.
So we agreed that from now onwards we must do everything we can, especially as leaders, to ensure that our people live peacefully, they live happily, and we are able to work together because ultimately we are one people.
Experts welcome the recent engagement between the two countries. Following the talks in Nairobi, Kenyan authorities announced the resumption of direct flights and the issuance of visa on arrival to Somali citizens and diplomats.
This new diplomatic engagement between Mogadishu and Nairobi, declared by President Uhuru Kenyatta and his counterpart Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo in Nairobi, is very significant and timely in a sense that two countries cooperate in key areas including security, that is fight on armed group Al-Shabaab, which is becoming a very big challenge for both countries.
The Somali leader also lauded Kenya's role in pacifying Somalia and AMISOM, the multinational African Union military force that has allowed Mogadishu to turn the tide in its fight against Al-Shabaab militant group that continues to pose a regional security threat. Tension between the two countries began early this year after Somalia hosted a major conference on oil and gas in London. Nairobi accused Mogadishu of auctioning oil and gas blocks in that disputed territory along the Indian Ocean, claims Somali authorities deny. For now, both sides seem to have struck a deal as they await the court's final judgment next year. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Here's a little fun fact for you. Pyramids are not just found in Egypt. Oh no, certainly not. Sudan's new government, in fact, is now looking to its pyramids, the ones that it does have, to boost tourist numbers. An influx of hard currency is sorely needed for the country to overcome its economic problems. The transitional government has eased visa regulations and it's been upgrading its long-neglected treasure trove of antiquities. CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports.
These royal pyramids of Meroe aren't in Egypt. Instead, they can be found in the neighboring country of Sudan. They're from the Nubian Kush dynasty some 2,500 years ago. Like the Egyptians, members of the royal family here were also buried in pyramid tombs.
I'm excited, and I feel I'm in ancient time. It's very fantastic.
I saw lots of pictures and we were sweeping nearby, so I was able to see it during the evening and in the morning. Until now, I found the landscape really beautiful and people are really, really nice, always very welcome.
These antiquities may be smaller in size compared to those in Egypt, but there are many more of them dotted around ancient sites. Yet Sudan only attracts a fraction of the tourists that Egypt boasts.
Our idea was to film these archaeological sites from interesting perspectives that people have not seen before. We then turned them into videos and short documentaries to attract tourists.
If great infrastructure is provided at all tourist and archaeological sites in Sudan, if state support is provided, and if companies invest more in this industry, then I am sure that Sudan will be an attraction for tourists worldwide.
The public can now enter the pyramids for the first time ever and will soon be able to go into the tombs underneath. And with $135 million from Qatar, several of the pyramids will be restored after decades of neglect.
These drawings and carvings are threatened by the sand encroachment, which is considered the primary threat to the drawings, specifically the external ones. We are working on restoring them on a regular basis so that we can preserve them.
Sudan still remains an unlikely holiday destination. But with the new government's push for tourists, hopefully more people around the world will be able to appreciate the culture and history of Sudan. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
A walk there through what used to be called once upon a time Upper Egypt. All right, then, let's get back to one of the stories we covered a little earlier, the dispute between Kenya and Somalia. It's a maritime dispute that's been brewing for quite a few months, in fact, years now, as we speak at the moment. But at its heart is a question of who's going to get access to oil and gas resources. Let's discuss this a little further. Mahat Mohammed is the CEO of IBS, International Bank of Somalia. He joins me now live from the seaside capital of Mogadishu. Thank you very much for your time this evening, sir. In the period that this dispute has been running, can you give us a sense of how trade between Kenya and Somalia has been affected?
Thank you. I think I'll first begin with the positive news that came out of the meeting between the two presidents and the subsequent restoration of the visa on arrival, which basically now paves the way for free movement of people. And as we all know, Kenya being the biggest economy in this region at about 100 billion plus GDP, Somalia stands in a big way to benefit from that. And one other thing as well is that Somalia imports most of its skilled labor from Kenya. We have about 30,000 plus Kenyans working in the country in different sectors ranging from education to hospitality, technology and all. So I think it presents a very good opportunity to reinforce the strong relationship economically and politically that has been there for decades between Kenya and Somalia.
Right, but this isn't the first time that we've heard leaders from both sides saying we'd like to normalize ties. Back in April, for instance, the Kenyan the Foreign Affairs CS, was saying the exact same thing, and we didn't really see any material changes then. Is it different this time round?
I think, Rahman, I will probably say that both parties have seen the effects of this issue, the impact it has had on the economies, the impact it has had on the free movement of people. And I think from where we sit, from the private sector, I think we're very optimistic, and really looking forward to this new formed, reinforcement of the relationship going further and extending into the many years to come. I think both countries stand to lose and to gain at the same time if this issue is amicably resolved.
Right. One last question for you, sir. In October, the petroleum minister in Somalia indicated that about 15 oil blocks essentially coming up for licensing. Are you seeing potential investor interest growing as relations between Kenya and Somalia thaw out, or has this dispute acted as a sort of dampener that's kept capital on the sidelines waiting until that's resolved?
Well, I think, as we all know, this issue of the maritime dispute has been there back from 2014, when Somalia actually filed a case against Kenya in the ICJ. And there were a lot of subsequent, efforts to resolve the issue in a different way. And I think Somalia right now has a petroleum sector law, which was actually passed, and there's a petroleum bill that exists. And what this does, it paves way for exploration of oil in the Somalia waters. And definitely in the near future, we're going to see a lot of, petroleum sharing agreements, or PSAs as they're called, being subsequently signed. So whether there's a sale of blocks or not, I think, we have sufficient mineral resources that exist in our borders and our boundaries. And I think there's a lot of focus on this maritime issue and the oil block issue. But there are a lot of investment opportunities in Somalia right now, and a virgin, opportunities in terms of the agriculture, fishery, finance, or the banking sector as well. So this will basically reinforce those other opportunities and become a means of propelling the economic development of Somalia.
Indeed, I can't think of a better way to end it. Mohammed, CEO of IBS Bank in Somalia, thank you very much for your time. Let's head over to Tunisia now. It's launching a modernization plan of its main port in a bid to boost exports and make the port a lot more efficient. Now, this upgrade will help track containers a lot faster and optimize management of cargo in the port.
The main component of the modernization project of the port of Venice will be accompanied by two other components, namely the establishment of a smart gate which will help organize and plan the flow of goods at the terminal's entry and exit gates, and to acquire 6 new cranes to increase the storage capacity of the port.
This project is a real revolution for this port. Its objective is to raise this port to international standards in terms of transport and logistics, step up its efficiency, and make life easier for economic operators and boost Tunisian export, which 98% depend on maritime transport.
The project also aims to ensure the instantaneous tracking of containers in the port and optimize the movement of gear, avoiding unproductive travel, to increase the performance of the embarkation and disembarkation operations, reduce the cost of storage, and to better manage the flows and the port's entrance and exit.
In comparison to 2010, the productivity of the port of Venice has decreased. The quantities of goods were reduced and transferred to other ports because of the lack of equipment. The ongoing modernization project is necessary to resume a normal activity.
The modernization initiative is financed by means of around $27 million by the World Bank.
The first 3 essential components of the project will be followed by 2 other components. It involves the development of digitized customs management systems and the modernization of container removal system.
Authorities say that an electronic payment system will be made available to economic operators in the next 2 weeks. According to the Minister of Transport, the modernization project is aimed to restore the dynamic of the port, to step up its efficiency, and to increase the container storage capacity. The success of the project requires the involvement of all stakeholders. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Still in North Africa, this time in Egypt, the country has been restructuring its food subsidy program to help low-income earners cope with the burden of austerity measures that have been implemented by the government as part of a broader IMF reform program. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
Mohammed is a father of 3. He's a government employee with a minimum wage. He comes here every 2 weeks with his ration card to receive subsidized food.
It's easy to use like the bank ATM card. The ration card informs the shop of the amount I'm allowed to buy every month, and then I choose the goods I want. There's a wide variety of products like olives, vegetables, all types of cheese, oil, sauce, even meat, and much more to get at low prices.
Bread has always been an integral part of the food subsidies. A loaf of bread costs 55 Egyptian cents to produce. It is sold for only 5 cents by the government.
The subsidies on food has reached about $6 billion, which is about 5.3% of the GDP. There's been an increase of about 2% more than the year before, according to the economic reforms. There are specialized committees to ensure that shops sell at the subsidized prices.
Over half of Egypt's 100 million people have ration cards. Food subsidies eat out a third of the state budget every year. And the government has been reviewing the list of those on ration cards. It says many who are well off are still receiving subsidies and should be cut off.
There's new criteria in place for those who have gotten their ration cards revoked, those who own a car, those who have high electricity and mobile consumption bills, and those who send their children to private schools and have high salaries. They have not been allowed to renew their ration cards.
Officials believe the new system would ensure subsidies would go to its rightful owners. The cancelled ration cards will save millions of dollars for the state budget, and the government says the money saved will go into better quality services for the low-income earners, such as education and health. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
It's 18:30 GMT. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. Hong Kong sinks into recession for the first time in a decade. And we'll be exploring why OPEC members might be facing a fair bit of competition from other producers in 2020.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some stories making your headlines at this hour. At least 20 people have been killed in an attack by gunmen on a Fulani village in the central region of Mali. This latest attack comes as communal violence does continue to rise in the affected region. Conflict between the farming Dogon community and the Fulani pastoralists have been going on for decades now, but it's become a lot more deadly in recent times. The government spokesperson says that security forces have been deployed to pursue the assailants. Elsewhere, workers at the state-owned carrier South African Airways have started a 2-day-long strike. SA has cancelled almost all of its domestic, regional and international flights all the way up to Monday next week. Following this walkout, the workers are affiliated to the unions NUMSA and SACA. They're demanding an 8% wage hike and an end to the carrier's retrenchment plans. And finally, delegates from Nigeria, Benin and Niger now say they will ensure that people who are crossing the respective borders must display documents recognized by the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, that's the regional trade bloc. In a joint communique, the leaders also agreed to set up a joint border patrol designed to curb the smuggling of goods back and forth across the border, particularly cheap fuel from Nigeria. Foreign ministers from the region met after Nigeria closed its land borders for trade until the end of January 2020. That's a run through your headlines. On to Hong Kong now. Fresh data from there shows that the city sank into a recession for the first time in a decade in the third quarter. Government data there shows that Hong Kong's economic growth fell 3.2% in Q3. The financial hub's GDP contracted for the second quarter in a row, and that essentially is a technical definition of a recession. The government also revised its forecast for full-year growth down to contraction of 1.3%. That would essentially mark the first annual decline since 2009. Analysts say that with no end in sight to the protests that we're seeing in the city, the slump could be long and relatively deep. Retail, tourism, particularly small businesses, have taken the hardest hits during this protest. August retail sales were the worst on record, down 23% year on year. September sales fell by 18.3%. IHS Markit earlier reported that business activity in Hong Kong's private sector fell to its weakest level in 21 years in October. Now then, on to the oil market. We'll cover this in a little more detail later on, but here's the nub of the story. The International Energy Agency has signaled that OPEC and her allies could face heavier competition from other producers next year. Now, the IEA basically said in its monthly report that demand for OPEC's crude could fall sharply due to a surge in non-OPEC supplies. The report estimated that non-OPEC oil output will rise by 2.3 million barrels a day next year. And the IEA said that increased production will come from a handful of countries: the United States, Brazil, Norway, and Guyana. Now, the concept of a digital city is turning from idea into reality. That's particularly true in Singapore. The city-state is helping small business owners upgrade to the latest digital solutions. CGTN's Mirulu explains how.
Over 100 small business owners in Singapore's Little India have been given a digitalization boost thanks to government agencies and industry stakeholders in an attempt to ensure that grassroots businesses don't get left behind as the country upgrades to a smart nation.
We did a survey trying to understand how the digitalization program could help the merchants within the Little India precincts. So following that survey, we came up with two projects. One is on e-payment and the other one is e-commerce. Both the e-payment and e-commerce to help improving the businesses processes, improving or increasing the business transactions, and to also look at optimizing resources in terms of human capital, in terms of automation, so that things can be faster, easier, and much more accessible.
Although the new digital age offers a wealth of opportunities for e-commerce players and online sellers, it can be intimidating for small and family-run offline businesses. The Little India Digitalization Project aims to engage these mom-and-pop shops and bring them up to speed with their tech-savvy shoppers.
SME Center, they have helped me a lot. They came down and they guide me through.
As part of the project, an online shopping portal was set up to target Singapore's Indian community. Shopkeepers were encouraged to join the specialized e-commerce site to sell their products online, with the back end and logistics being taken care of by the platform.
This digitalization program helps me with running the business at a different platform, whereas my own business is still running. So with that, I see an increase in the business, maybe a 15 to 20%, a margin of increase. So I think it's a good way of moving forward.
Online payment QR codes have recently started to pop up in Little India, an area where previously cash was king.
The type of people who come here who want to do online payments, okay, we have got a lot of younger generation from the local community who are paying through their smartphone. And also we get a lot of tourists who come by and just show their smartphone for their payments. You'll be surprised that especially tourists from China, okay, that's remarkable. Even for a dollar item, they still show us their mobile phone.
These SMEs in Little India are at the beginning of their digitalization journey. But as countries across the Asia-Pacific region develop their digital economies, it is clear that businesses from the ground up must strengthen their digital presence to provide the best service for their smart shoppers. Mirulu, CGTN, Singapore.
Let's shift our focus now to Europe. The Italian city of Venice has been hit particularly hard by really high water levels. This crisis comes just days after Venice suffered from its worst flooding in nearly more than 50 years. But despite the high tides, there's still tourists who are flocking to this lagoon city.
Smiling tourists sporting colorful shoe protectors wade into St. Mark's Square in Venice to take selfies. On Thursday, another high tide caused seawater to fill the square and delight many of those who had traveled from all over the world to visit the lagoon city. Most tourists don't seem to believe there is much that can be done to save Venice from the encroaching sea. Any protection that could be carried out, some tourists fear, could change the special charm of the city.
In my opinion, I don't think we can particularly save Venice. I think we should let the natural processes do its thing. If we were to try and save Venice, perhaps building some type of wall or retaining structure around the outside, but of course that's going to have other implications in different areas.
Some tourists travel to the city especially to experience the high water level. They delight in sloshing around in the murky water.
We decided to visit Venice because we understood that Venice has big water, and we understand that this picture is beautiful.
But others have simply had enough spending whole days trying to find somewhere where they can buy food. The constant flooding has caused massive problems. The hotels and restaurants, many of whom are struggling to provide any kind of service for their visiting clients.
We change our plans about Venice, and we will go tomorrow to Verona or Ferrari or Padua. Only today we stay in Venice. That's why, because the water is high. It's high. Yeah.
It was a bit difficult to find food yesterday night because we walked maybe for more than 1 hour to find a shop open. But finally we find, and we appreciate more our food now.
Yeah, all the restaurants were closed and also the shops were closed. So our day spending was finding food yesterday. So yeah, that was really odd.
Experts said the tourists may have seen the funny side on Thursday, but on Friday the city was expecting heavy rain and another high tide. The additional water may just be enough to chase the remaining tourists away. Jun Chao, CGTN.
This year's BRICS summit is wrapped up in Brazil. The two-day event concluded with the declaration on the importance of improving cooperation between the 5 members of this bloc. CGTN's Yu Yang has a summary of the summit outcomes.
A defense of multilateralism. That's a strong signal sent by the world's major emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. BRICS leaders have inked a joint statement, the Brasilia Declaration. The document lays stress on overcoming challenges facing multilateralism, upholding the central role of the UN in international affairs, while building a community of shared future for mankind. It says there is an urgent need to reform multilateral organizations, including the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the International Monetary Fund. BRICS nations reiterated the importance of the rules-based, open, free, and inclusive international trade. The bloc speaks highly of new development banks' efforts in infrastructure and financing. It also says it will promote sustainable development in economic, social, and environmental dimensions. Chinese President Xi Jinping was particularly critical of the global rise of protectionism, in part reflected in the China-US trade conflict.
But there are also causes for concern. For example, increased protectionism and unilateralism, creating a governance, development, and reliability deficit.
The Brasilia Declaration also says BRICS members will stick to the Paris Agreement under the principles of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The document reiterates the bloc condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, and says that BRICS will also fight against internet and communication crimes. The BRICS summit is held annually, alternating among its 5 members. The bloc accounts for over 40% of the global population, and in 2018, BRICS countries accounted for 33% of global GDP. Despite navigating around different politics and culture, the group hopes to see the rewards through cooperation. Yu Yang, CGTN.
Now, China has issued a new regulation on combating video game addiction, especially among minors. The measures include real name registration, specified hours as well for when youngsters can actually get online and play, and a cap on how much can be spent on in-game add-ons. CGTN's Umar Khan now exploring how families are welcoming these new changes and how one of China's largest tech companies is looking to support it.
It's just another Sunday morning for Adam Turnbull and his son Tristan. Enjoying what's left of Guangzhou's warm autumn season, the two are getting in a bit of exercise and play before it's back to school the next day for the youngster. But like any other 6-year-old, play undeniably includes video games, and it's something his father keeps a close eye on.
Well, I do think that there needs to be some kind of awareness for the issue of video game addiction and really wasting a lot of time, because of course for kids, in my opinion as a parent, we have a lot of challenges, especially here in China. My son goes to grade 1 in a public school. Every evening he's got at least an hour of homework, and so if we have to fight with him to get his homework done as opposed to playing video games, that's something that we have to, it's a challenge that we have.
Luckily for the Canadian expat, who's been in China for nearly 2 decades and has worked with STEAM education as an innovator, a newly issued regulation setting limits on gaming might just be the solution.
I think that companies having this restriction as opposed to the user, the gamer, I guess, it makes a lot of sense in China, because I think that it's kind of a new phenomenon. It's a new, especially with accessibility with devices, with mobile phones, with having gaming in your hands at all time. China has a challenge to make sure that there's a balance, and there has to be some kind of accountability to the companies that are profiting from having video games in everyone's pockets 24/7.
With China being the world's second largest video game market in terms of game revenue, these regulations heavily focus on game developers and big companies. I'm here at Tencent's offices in Shenzhen to see exactly how they're looking to support this new effort. For Tencent, they're already ahead of the curve. 3 years ago, they established a special team focusing on anti-addiction solutions.
I think it's good news for this industry. So actually, we have done a lot of work in this area, and now this new announcement gives us, I think it's a very clear guidance for our future work. So based on what we have already done, so we have a very clear direction.
As for who's responsible for creating awareness around video game addiction, Zheng says we can all do our bit.
Parents, teachers, schools, of course, the game companies should work together and to find a useful, maybe a perfect solution for this topic.
However fun video games may be, can it really compare to a good old play in the park? Omar Khan, CGTN, Guangzhou.
Right, then a quick run through commodity prices here for you. A bit of a bump in oil prices today, 63 or so on the Brent crude index. We're seeing a smaller number in the Baker Hughes rig count over the United States, a reduction of about 11 rigs on a week-on-week basis. Africa's biggest oil producer still smack in the middle of a trade dispute, as I mentioned, with their ECOWAS neighbours. Trade across land borders, though, still essentially stopped. So it remains to be seen exactly to what extent these joint patrol solution between Benin, Niger and Nigeria will ostensibly stop the smuggling of goods, especially cheap subsidized Nigerian fuel, across their common border. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore how one former militant is now leading an economic revolution in Nigeria when we come back.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights,
the greatest adventures.
Here in Tanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference. Welcome back to the final part of Global Business Africa. Now, the Nigerian government has been advocating for agriculture as a viable option for economic diversification. One such policy is being harnessed by a former militant. Back in 2017, Retson Tedeke left the creek of the Niger Delta, that's really the heartland of the country's oil sector, to set up one of Africa's largest farming operations, now valued at over $3.5 million. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam with that story.
A team of employees at the Farming Community Center in Gate. When Retson Tadheke left the creeks of the Niger Delta to the north-central region, little did he know that he would birth the largest community farming revolution that would impact the country's economy. The former militant started the Nigerian Farmers Group and Cooperative Society in 2017 with less than $5,000 on a 3-hectare land. The farm currently sits on 3,000 hectares of land and houses a crop farm, a ranch, poultry, rice and corn mills, and several other units.
The technology that Nigeria has is not the technology of making cars and phones. The technology that we have is the technology of land and people. And so the aim was simple. How do we empower our people? How do we drive rural Nigeria to understand that if we utilize our land with the support of government, with the support of bank, we can empower more of our people.
About 17 settlements are part of the thriving farming association, and that has changed their fortunes since then. The center is valued at $3.5 million and has provided jobs for over 300 people.
This has impacted me in many ways. Concerning engineering, number one, because I mill in a rice mill. So even if my engine is having problem, I can solve the problem myself because I've been there and I've monitored and they have taught me, I've learned.
They produce between 150 and 210 tons of grains daily and could yield even more with a fortified system that supports farmers.
Farmers must stop paying for land, right? And then building infrastructure. No, we cannot build infrastructure, buy machineries, seek for funding, and then expect to be successful. We must have a system whereby local, state, government, and must augment what the federal government is doing with regards to provision of land, of rural infrastructure.
Farmers and investors here are hoping for a national integrated system that ultimately encourages more Nigerian youths to be involved in agriculture. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And in Tunisia, one English teacher there has developed a mobile app that's helping students who can neither hear nor talk learn English a lot easier. CGTN's Terry Wangari has more.
Solving problems through innovation. Manal Bargawi's app is helping deaf-mute people learn English. The app offers interactive audiovisual material to teach English using Tunisian Sign Language.
The idea of the book is different from the books we use with other people, because teaching for the deaf-mute is different. The book has images and different topics from the ones we teach to other people. I designed the application that depends on that book.
The app is called LETS, which is an acronym for Learning English Through Signs. The application is designed to help deaf-mute people learn wherever they are for free.
When I came to the NGO here, I realized there are a lot of problems, either related to education or the society. As an English teacher, I thought I should teach them English after I learned sign language, so that it will be the first time to teach English using the Tunisian sign language. I realized that teaching English needs a whole pedagogy. That's why I participated in a program and traveled to the United States and saw how they teach the deaf-mute there.
The application has helped students like Aziz Msakni, who otherwise had little opportunities to learn English at school.
When I was young, I went to a regular school. I never felt equal. I felt inferior to other students. They did not use sign language, which confused me and I could not cope. After some time, I joined the Voice of the Deaf-Mute NGO and I found what I was lacking. Here, I can use sign language and we benefit from a lot of activities that develop my skills and also help me develop.
The self-funded teacher says the application is still in the developmental phases and plans to include materials serving different levels of English language proficiency. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Right then, let's wrap up the program with a run through some currencies here for you. So there's often a question around austerity, which we've reported a lot on here in Egypt, with a sort of negative connotation. But as far as some macro indicators are concerned, Egypt's actually not looking bad. Its currency, for instance, is one of the better performers in the list that we're following here. It's up against the dollar so far this year by nearly 10%. At today's levels of just over 16 Egyptian pounds to the dollar. Inflation has also fallen steeply. It hit 3.1% last month. Last time we saw data like that, it was December 2005. That last data point is one of the reasons why Egypt ended the week with a 100 basis point rate cut. Those are your currencies, and that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. Thank you for your company all this week. We'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen. There's several ways of getting your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramanyang in your Kenyan capital, Nairobi. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.